Hello, and welcome to the Bamboo Lab podcast with your host, peak performance coach, Brian Bosley. Are you stuck on the hamster wheel of life, spinning and spinning, but not really moving forward? Are you ready to jump off and soar? Are you finally ready to sculpt your life? If so, you've landed in the right place. This podcast is created and broadcast just for you. All of you strivers, thrivers, and survivors out there. If you'd like to learn more about Brian and the Bamboo Lab, feel free to reach out to explore your true peak level at www.bamboolab3.com.
Welcome, everyone, to this week's episode of the Bamboo Lab podcast. As always, I'm your host, Brian Bosley. We've got a great episode on this week, something I've been looking forward to for the past few weeks. But before we get started, I want to go through the latest analytics. As of today, which is December 6, 2022, we are now being followed and subscribed to on 6 continents, 40 countries, all 50 states, and now we are in 1,016 cities. We finally crashed over that 1,000 city mark, which took us a while. It seemed like we hubbled around 950, 980, 990. We crept up there, then we got to 1,000, and now we're going for 2,000 cities. So we're happy to have you on this week, everyone. I want to read a heart letter that came through just last week, and this one touched me. And I got to be honest with you. I was sitting in my house, and I pulled up my email or my messages, and I got this one, and a tear came to my eye. And I had to respond and say, well, I want to thank you because you just put a happy tear into my eye. It came from a subscriber, one of the Bamboo Pack members, and he said, "Hi, Brian. I just wanted to give you a heart message. I walked by my daughter's room the other day in the morning, and I heard your voice. As I'm an avid listener to your podcast since the very beginning with you and Dave Dick. So my 14-year-old daughter has her alarm set to your podcast. That's how she wakes up. Thank you for the life-changing messages for me and my family. Thank you, Brian, for the changes you've made in my life and my kids' lives." Wow. So without further ado, this one I'm going to dedicate to that young lady. Her name is Megan. Megan, we're going to hear a lot about you in the future. I just know it. You are going to get out there and change the world. And thank you so much for being such an avid listener to the Bamboo Lab podcast. I really deeply appreciate you. All right. Today, folks, we're going to introduce our guest here in a minute, but I want to share a little bit about who he is. This is Seth Breedlove. Now, you may or may not know his name, but you will. Seth is a filmmaker of documentaries. And I don't know, it was maybe 5 or 6 years ago. I was looking around YouTube or Amazon Prime, and as you know, I'm a kind of a Bigfoot guy. I like the fascination, the possibility of the possibility. And not that we're going to go into a Bigfoot podcast in the Bamboo Lab podcast, but the last 2 guests are people who are involved in that world of cryptozoology and documentaries. And I was going through and I found this one called the Minerva Monster. I'm like, yeah, this is kind of cool graphics, and on the front on the artwork. And so I listened to it. I'm like, wow, this is one of the better documentaries I've ever watched on this subject. So I started looking for more, and there were a couple more. And now since then, I think that one came out around 2015. Seth has made roughly 21 films and 7 miniseries. I mean, their Small Town Monsters YouTube page has over 100,000 subscribers, and they're on Amazon Prime, they're on YouTube, and he also has a radio show podcast called Monsteropolis. And if you look at the ratings of these movies and these documentaries, they are very, very highly rated. So all the way from Ohio, Canton, Ohio area, with he and his son Tommy living there, I want to welcome you, Seth Breedlove, to the Bamboo Lab podcast.
Hey, thanks so much for having me.
Oh, it's a pleasure, man. When I was speaking with Melissa Barrickman last week, when we got done, we spoke for quite a few minutes afterward, and she said, "You're really going to like talking to Seth. He's a really interesting guy." So I have no doubt. So Seth, I get to see you a lot on your films and hear your voice quite a bit. I don't know a lot about you personally, even though I do follow you on Facebook and we're connected on Facebook. But can you please share with me and the Bamboo Pack members a little bit about yourself, where you're from, etc.?
I grew up in a tiny town in Ohio called Bolivar, which is just off the Highway 77 that runs through the state. My parents owned a bookstore and a craft store. I grew up in a family that created independent businesses solely, pretty much. And so I grew up in an independent business-minded family, which I think probably plays into what I do for a living now. But yeah, we traveled a lot when I was a kid. And as far as like what I do for a living today, I have no idea how it came to be or why it came to be. But sometime around 2014, actually 2013, I put together a book proposal for a book about cryptids in North America called Small Town Monsters. And I had sent the book proposal out to like numerous publishers, and they all rejected it. And so about a year after that, I took one of the cases that I had been investigating and I turned it into a movie, which is Minerva Monster. And then I was working. So I started working in newspapers around 2010, I want to say 2009, 2010, somewhere around there. I started working in freelance reporting for newspapers here in Ohio. And so I used some of the skills that I had picked up doing that job and just kind of brought it to bear on the cryptid topic, because there's a ton of content out there about cryptids, but it's typically, especially if it's being done by like a major network, it's done in a very lowest common denominator sort of way. And I wanted to approach it a little differently and bring a more like journalistic slant to it, much more objective than what I was seeing on television. And so we made Minerva Monster, and then we started making other movies after that. We took the money we made on Minerva and flipped it into a movie called Beast of Whitehall that I filmed in upstate New York with my dad and my friend Brandon. And we actually had to film that movie twice, which is a story in and of itself. But yeah, we just kind of like, we've expanded over the last 7-8 years since we started. And we now do 4 to 5 feature-length films per year, which we put out. We've been distributing through 1091, which is a very, very big distributor. And we've had a lot of luck in North America, and I know our movies have aired on television in the UK and things like that as well. And then we also have the YouTube component that you mentioned, where we do a lot of seasonal or episodic format content over on that on YouTube, which has only really started in the last year and a half. That's when we really started focusing on YouTube. We mostly did that to diversify out of relying solely on feature films, because it's just filmmaking is a very tough business. Like the actual production of a movie is maybe like 1/5 of the job that you do. The rest of it is all in, like keeping your business afloat and promotion and that kind of thing. So, but yeah, I grew up in an independent-minded family, and I watched, my parents struggle with independent business, and I thought, hey, that seems like fun. I think I'll struggle with independent business the rest of my life too. So that's my origin story, I guess.
Well, it's interesting, and I know I don't know anything about filmmaking, but I know there's a lot of behind-the-scenes toil and hard work that goes into it. As you said, 1/5 is production, the rest is keeping the business afloat and other things. It always seems like in the movies, and I think that's what attracts me when I watch the documentaries and the films, is that it seems like it's just a bunch of friends out in the woods having fun. It really does, and you feel like what I feel, Seth, is when I'm watching one of your films, you feel like you're right there, and I really like that. I like that. I mean, Small Town Monsters is by far my favorite of all the different films that are out there, documentaries on the cryptid world. And I think that's probably why. And I think I've seen every single one, at least the ones that I know you've released a couple of the mini series, as I call them, or the I think they're kind of one-offs or things like that. But I haven't probably watched every one of those. I'm not quite caught up. I did watch one last night, and we spoke about that earlier. But so growing up, then, I mean, this is a really interesting life that you live. I mean, you're not doing taxes somewhere. You're not selling insurance. I mean, you're doing a very eclectic. You have a very eclectic career choice. So to get there, what as a child or in your younger years, what inspired you to be that filmmaker and to go into such a unique genre of film?
Yeah, I mean, the road that took to get to where I am now with STM is really roundabout. But as a kid, my mom introduced me to. Well, I mean, there's so many things you find inspiration from later in life that you kind of grew up with. I know my parents introduced me to the Marx Brothers, so I was obsessed with the Marx Brothers when I was a kid. And then later, my mom showed me some Ray Harryhausen movies. So the ones that I know that I watched were Seventh Voyage of Sinbad and I forget what the other one was, but Jason and the Argonauts. Those are the two that she showed me as a kid. And that was the first time I became aware that there was someone actually making a movie. Like I think as a kid, you kind of watch a movie and it's just a story playing out on screen. You think you're watching the historical document or something. But yeah, Ray Harryhausen was the first time I became aware of filmmaking as an art form or a job or however you want to look at it. And so, like, I did want to make movies when I was a kid. That was one of my passions. My director of photography, Zach Palmisano, him and I have known each other for like 25 years, and we were doing short films in our late teens together. Like making short films and stuff like that. But sometime around when I graduated high school, I kind of gave up on filmmaking as a realistic job, which looking back on it is totally understandable, because, even in around 1999, 98, you were still making movies on film, and film was extremely expensive. And the only other option was something like, VHS or the very early stages of digital, which still required tape. And it just, the whole process was insane. Actually, even back then, that's how we made our short films, was to shoot them on a Sony Handycam onto a tape, and then you edited the tape. Mm-hmm. And so that was how, when we were starting out, that was what we were doing. But there was you didn't have a chance in heck of having an audience see the work. So you would put in hours of work, but no one watched what you did, because even YouTube didn't exist. I mean, I've tried to explain this too. A lot of people have attempted to duplicate what we've done as a company, and I get a very common question of like, how do we do what you do? And the easiest way to put it, without demeaning anybody, especially me, is that it takes a heck of a lot of luck. Because we got into all this in 2015. In 2016, Amazon launched a platform called Video Direct that allowed filmmakers to sell directly to their audience. And we were one of the first people on that platform. And that was how we initially built the company. They've since shut that down and, took about 60% of our revenue at the time. But we lucked out because we were in the infant stages of this thing that built an audience for our work, that were willing to support it. But yeah, that filmmaking was always something I was really into, but I was definitely told by many people that it was not a realistic work, job, field, career, whatever. And I don't like Hollywood. I've been there a number of times. I was never interested in working in Hollywood, working out of Hollywood. I've seen that industry from behind the scenes. Mm-hmm. I've watched I got to be a part of seeing Godzilla versus Kong being made in the pre-production stages, and saw the suits coming into the offices and having meetings over that kind of thing. And I had no interest in being involved in that. So I kind of walked away from filmmaking as anything that I was interested in for a very long period of time. And in that time, I worked at my parents' craft store, and then eventually I worked as a FedEx driver, and I repossessed homes, and I did I worked for like 6 to 7 years as a medical biller. And then I was doing so many jobs at once because all that was kind of happening at once, that I took on that newspaper gig. The newspaper gig, it was like step one toward film. But I've always told the story that I had no idea that we had made a movie when we made Minerva Monster until it premiered. And that's because to me, it was almost just like, it was so in line with what I was already doing for the newspapers, where you're just interviewing witnesses or interviewing people, and then you're putting their story out there for an audience to consume. To me, it was just another story I was working on telling. But I had so many contacts in Ohio newspapers at the time that I was able to drum up a ton of interest in the project as we were making it. So when we did we held a premiere in downtown Minerva, and 1,200 people showed up, and you could hardly move downtown, around downtown Minerva, because there were so many people. It looked like, I always say that I came out the back entrance of the theater, because I was in the theater trying to help get people seated and everything. And I came out the back entrance and noticed there was a line that stretched like 3 blocks down the street. It looked like we were showing Star Wars. And it was at that point that I realized we had made a movie. So that was the first time that I connected what we had just done with filmmaking and what I wanted to do as a kid. And then once that hit, then I knew where I was going next. And that was to build my own production company and build a series around that style of movie. And that's changed somewhat, because we do, there's different formats to what we make now. We have what we call the legend movies, which would be the series that like Minerva Monster began as, which pretty much just focus on retelling local legends through eyewitness accounts or experts, folklorists, things like that. And then we have the more like boots on the ground, adventure style filmmaking that Alexander does with Beyond the Trail, and I've done in the past with some of the On the Trail of Bigfoot movies. And then there's another style that's like somewhere in between those two. It's definitely more adventure filmmaking, less polished than the legend movies, but maybe slightly less time in the woods and more time focused on interviewing witnesses. So we're doing a few different things pretty much all the time. We also launched like a book publishing wing this past year as well. So we've put out 2 books through that, and we have another on the way.
So Seth, with the different styles, do you prefer the more polished style of the Legend series, or do you like being boots on the ground, out in the woods, up in the mountains, doing the exploration yourself?
I don't have a preference, just because we make so many projects per year that whatever we're doing offers me a break from the thing we did previously.
Okay.
So I prefer, I guess I prefer the less polished stuff, because it doesn't require all the attention to detail that making the legend movies does. But there comes a point when you're just doing that kind of thing over and over again, where you're ready for a challenge. Like we just made a movie about the Jersey Devil. That's actually a little different from our normal style. It's very much like the documentary portions of the movie are very historically accurate, historically based, essentially like a debunking of the Jersey Devil legend. And then it's tied together with these 3 vignettes that are shot in various film styles from the era where the story that they're sort of like representing takes place. So there's a story set in the early 1900s. There's a silent film, and then there's a section set in the 80s, and we do this like Spielberg style thing. And then there's a 1600s section that's shot in a very like realistic, spooky black and white style that kind of like harkens back to something like Hammer horror.
That was just released, wasn't it, Seth? The Jersey Devil Curse?
Yeah, it just came out. A couple of weeks ago. Tanked immediately. Which that's the thing I've noticed about our movies is that the legend movies have actually fallen off as being like our popular series. The thing that kind of built the company is much less popular than something like On the Trail of Bigfoot, or some of what we're doing with, the YouTube. Skinwalker: The Howl of the Rougarou that came out last year was our last really successful Legend movie, which is, it probably sounds ridiculous that I'm saying that series has fallen off when we put out a successful one a year ago. But since then, we've put out like 5 or 6 movies. So the production slate is just so packed. There's always something going on. But that's why I enjoy jumping between the different styles of filmmaking, because it keeps you, it offers a challenge. Otherwise, I do think that you can get lazy. We've been lazy on movies before, where like you've got a thing to fall back on, and so you just kind of like you paint it by numbers, and the audience might still really respond to that. I mean, we've had movies that were extremely successful that I still, when I watch them, I bristle because I think we were kind of lazy in the making of it. And so the biggest thing for me is that we can keep challenging ourselves, and that's why we try to switch up the styles as we go.
Is there a dichotomy within you, Seth, where you can produce a film that has a great deal of critical success, but yet you don't feel you did the best, and you feel like you were sloppy in it? If you had to choose, where I have a film where I know we gave it our very best, this was the best we have, and it didn't have the critical success that you hoped it would you really prefer that, or one with a great deal of critical success where you realize, or critical success where you knew that we slopped around in this one, man?
Yeah, I don't. Yeah, that is a dichotomy, because the movie, the 2 movies I'm most proud of are 2 of the movies that flopped like the biggest. The Mark of the Bell, which I think is our best movie, and it never made much money, although it did air on television and things like that. Like, so it's had success. Everything we put out makes its money back because we spent so little. Mm-hmm. But that was a project where I wish a larger audience had found it, just because I think we did a really great job on that one, especially all the actors and everyone involved. The other is Momo, the Missouri Monster, which is similarly that's a movie where there's a very, it's a cult. It's like a cult following. If people find it that are into film, they like it because they get what we were going for, which was this like 70s drive-in style horror movie, kind of like sandwiched into a documentary about Bigfoot. And so those are the 2 that I'm most proud of, but they both kind of flopped. On the other hand, like On the Trail of Bigfoot, The Discovery, which we put out last year, we put that out last year, and it was probably the biggest thing we've ever released. And I was proud of that as well. Like, even though I felt like we were just kind of painting by numbers based on the previous On the Trail of Bigfoot movies, it was rewarding to see it work out so well. There have definitely been movies we've made where they did well, and I could not, for the life of me, figure out why. Skinwalker: The Howl of the Rougarou was a story I could not get into all through the process making the movie. What draws me to these stories it's not the spooky side of it. It's not the monsters. It's always like, I have to be emotionally invested in something. And in that movie, I could not find my hook. Actually, until right up until the very end of the production, of the editing process, and then I finally found the hook, which was the disappearing swamplands, the bayous of New Orleans and Louisiana. That was the thing that I hooked into. But when the movie came out, I still don't care very much for the movie. I think the crew did a great job. I think Heather, who does our research, and she helped me write that one and get the story together. I thought she did a great job, and the witnesses all did a fantastic job. But to me, it felt like a little lazy, which is strange because it really is one of the more successful movies we've released in the last 4 or 5 years. But that was one where, I just felt like we flubbed it. We put one out earlier this year. This isn't supposed to be me just trashing our work, but we put one out earlier this year called On the Trail of UFOs, Night Visitors. And because On the Trail of UFOs is a series. And that was one where during the filming of it, I could tell I was not going to lock into it. And I couldn't find a hook or anything that really drew me into it. And that was the one that we put out, and it ended up not finding much of an audience. Although, keep in mind, when I say it hasn't found an audience, our stuff will eventually find an audience. Everything does. Everything that we've put out eventually finds its audience. But it is a shame when you put it out and it's like a much smaller of an audience than you were wanting. And that was one where during the production, you could tell we were going to hit snags. Like, we had interviews drop out and things like that. And by the time we were leaving Colorado from shooting it, I think we only had like 8 interviews in the can. And I was like, this is going to be a tough sell or a tough edit, because I could tell we just didn't have as much there as I would have wanted. What we ended up doing was we really front loaded that movie with effects, in hopes that would, get the audience attention that the story itself deserved. In retrospect, I just wish we hadn't done the volume of effects in that movie that we did, because I think effects can be used in the right way, but a lot of times with our stuff, when we're using it, I feel like it almost undersells the story that you're trying to tell. So there's a balance you want to strike, because the cryptid world, the paranormal people, a general audience especially, they're watching it for entertainment, mm-hmm. and so you want them to be excited by the visuals, but it's a slippery slope, because if you overdo it, you can really undersell the story you're trying to tell. And that's what I think with that one, that's what we ended up doing.
Was that with Shannon LeGros?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. And Shannon and I actually had talks about that very thing after the movie was out. She's in another thing we just filmed in Texas back in October. That'll come out sometime next year, about like real werewolf sightings in Texas. And we had a talk going into it, and I said, I really want to scale back, like get really raw, mostly stick to like interview footage and location B-roll with some sketches and things like that, and just scale way back compared to some of the other stuff we did. And she was very excited about that. We had to talk about what her favorite documentaries are, like stuff on Netflix that have no effects, that are just interviews with witnesses or whoever. And I mean, that's how we started too. It's funny if you track the path that took us from Minerva Monster to where we are today, because Minerva's just almost straight interview footage from beginning to end. And then, we made this Jersey Devil movie that has like 200 effect shots in it. So it's an interesting path, but I do think a lot of that, like I said, a lot of it's just keeping ourselves engaged as a crew, because we work on this stuff. I'm not the only one that works full time. I employ 5 people. So,
okay.
It's for 4 of us, this is our full-time job. So,
okay. So I know Shannon LeGros, if anybody out there on the Bamboo Pack member, you want to check out her podcast, it's called Into the Fray. Really good podcast, really well done. Shannon's got a very amazing way of interviewing her guests. I was actually honored to be a guest of hers, I believe, in early summer of 2022 or late spring. I was a guest of hers on her podcast, and she does a great job as well. So, and I really was looking forward to seeing On the Trail of UFOs when it came out. I liked it myself, so I really did.
Cool.
I want to stop for just a minute, Seth. I'm gonna talk to the Bamboo Pack member out there who's listening in. I'm going to talk to you directly, Bamboo Pack member. I'm talking to all of you, but I'm talking to you. I want you to catch what Seth said. He's talking about his career, but he's not talking about the cryptic world. He's not talking about filmmaking. He's talking about your journey in your career. So think about this for a minute. So Seth always had a fascination with filmmaking, but of course, back in the day, it was expensive with film and things like that. And he took a job, and he was told this is an unrealistic career choice. And so he did some FedEx driving. He did some medical billing. He even repossessed some homes at one point. Then he got this newspaper job that then kind of parlayed into filmmaking. And he said, when he didn't realize he was making a film until the Minerva Monster premiere came out in Ohio, and he saw the line down the street, and he realized at that point there was an epiphany that happened. He said, "We are making films. I'm a filmmaker." I want you to think right now, to the Bamboo Pack member out there who's a little challenged in your life, a little challenged in your career, and not really, you're stuck on the hamster wheel. Maybe you don't really know where you're going, or the direction the direction you hope to go. You don't seem like that's where you're going at this point. Everything you do, as long as you keep your eyes open and keep looking for opportunities and a little bit of luck, as Seth said earlier, continue to move forward in your journey. Don't give up on the dream you have, but do what you're doing now so damn well, and keep your head on a swivel looking for opportunities, that what you're doing now, even if it's a completely different career, completely different industry, make sure that you're doing it so well that it's building you up to be the person you can be when that opportunity comes for you to be the person you want to be. That, when you can hit that epiphany where you can start doing what you want, but don't ever give up on your dream, man. I mean, sometimes our dreams change. I get that. I wanted to be so many things when I was a young boy, and those didn't come true, and I don't want them. I'm glad they didn't. But make sure if you have a solid expectation of your life and who you want to become and what you want to do, make sure that you're doing everything you can in your current role to build yourself up to be that person. Sorry, my son continues to call in every single podcast. And I do tell him, I told him yesterday, when I send an email out to the family saying I'll be podcasting, don't call in. And he said, okay, he's already called in twice in this podcast. So if you hear him beeping in, about every podcast, you hear beep, beep. So I just wanted to capture that because there was a lot of gold in what Seth said. And just as he was talking about his journey, he's sharing wisdom that we all can use. So if you like what Seth said so far, please smash that like button. Please rate us, review us, and share with 3 people. This is a message here that 3 people you love could truly benefit from. And even if you're not really interested in Bigfoot and UFOs and the Jersey Devil and American Werewolves, this is not really what this is about. These are incredible movies about, in my opinion, it's believing in the possibility of things, whatever that might be. And I think there's such an incredible journey your mind can go to when you look at a subject that you may not agree with, you may not believe in, and you still allow yourself to get sucked into the story, into the journey. That opens our minds to be more flexible in so many other areas, and that increases our comfort zones. So I'm going to include a link to Small Town Monsters, to their website on here. I would suggest go on there, jump on YouTube, jump on Amazon Prime, watch some of their films. They're really well done. They're a lot of fun, and I find, like I said, I'm right there with them. So Seth, the next question for you is, over the past, since you started filmmaking, really, when you realized in 7-8 years ago, whenever Monster was premiered 6-7 years ago, what has been the biggest difficulty you've gone through during that time?
Yeah, I mean, personally, there's a lot. Just just growing a business that has there's no blueprint for what we're doing. There are obviously independent production companies out there. But there's no blueprint for a company that's entirely based around cryptids and the paranormal to grow, to the point where there's a staff of people that are operating it and making regular productions. There was nothing to get us from point A to point B. We just had to find our way in the dark, and we still do. So the most difficult part has just been to keep the thing afloat. I know my friend Jason always tells me this hasn't happened lately, but every year I would inevitably hit some low point, usually after like a flop, like we'd put out a movie that seemed to flop. I would inevitably say, I just don't know how much longer we can do this. Like, it seems like everything kind of fails. And Jason would always tell me, it wasn't necessarily about doing this, like actually going out and making the movies or whatever. It's about being consistent with it and not quitting. Because in the end, like that's who the people that stick out the storm are the ones that remain. And so I always kind of clung to that, just not quitting despite the huge challenges we faced. I mean, we really did. Like we've had, there's been multiple times where if one wrong thing had happened, we could have gone under. It's happened numerous times because you're on such a production schedule, such a crazy production schedule, that money is constantly going out. So you're constantly putting money into the next production, and then hopefully the production you just put out funds what you're doing next. And so that's where we had been at for the first like 4 or 5 years of running the company. Thankfully, we're getting out of that cycle right now, hopefully. But I don't foresee there ever being a point where this is like an easy business to run or something that we're not going to have just massive challenges with every year. I mean, on a personal level, it's been crazy because my mom got cancer 2 years ago and has been fighting that ever since. And then I went through a divorce last year, so there's always going to be that kind of thing. But even when Adrian and I were together growing the company, it was about how do we feed our son and pay the bills and do that kind of stuff. But at the end of the day, it's no different from what my parents did. I say this all the time. People want to really romanticize film or romanticize filmmaking, but it's just a job. It's not, and we're especially because we're not in Hollywood. And the hardships I saw my parents face as bookstore owners or craft store owners is no different from the stuff we face making movies about Bigfoot, as insane as that might seem. Like, we still have all the same challenges. Running a company like this, it's just an independent business. It's a small business. So,
and I like what you said earlier. There was no blueprint, and that's a scary dock to jump off of when you don't know where the water is. Nobody's ever done that before, or at least to the way you are. But in a way, there's something freeing and enlightening about that. When I started consulting 26 years ago, there were business consultants, but they were primarily working with large Fortune 500 companies. They were coming from large consulting firms. And when I left my Fortune 500 career job from a big company and I started, I purposely did not read any books. I couldn't find many books actually on what I did. And if I saw them in a bookstore that was before Amazon, I would personally not even purposely not look at them because I didn't want a blueprint, because I wanted to do this the way I wanted to do it. Now I look back and say it was probably the foolish nature of a 29-year-old young man, but at the same time, I think it forced me to actually do things the way I think they should be done. And I'm assuming that's kind of what happened with you and Small Town Monsters as well. You're creating as you're going. You're creating your own blueprint, and there's a lot of liberty and freedom to that feeling.
Yeah, I always say be too dumb to quit. So if you're too like that is the secret to our success is that there were numerous times when we were building the company where the easiest thing to do, or maybe even the best thing to do at that time, would have been to say, okay, this isn't working. I should probably just go work a normal job. Even if I'm continuing to do this, like the best thing to do probably would have been to quit, or not quit, but at least, go do the other thing that I hated. But I'm not a terribly intelligent person. And once I get something in my head, I kind of just stick to it until it either becomes catastrophic disaster or it works out. And so, when I was building the company, I just was too dumb to quit. And we just kept going until it reached a point where we were able to start investing money into the company that would help grow it. And that was a key too, is to know, again, I can't stress this enough. I'm not an intelligent person. I essentially dropped out of high school. I did one day of college later in life, but I'm not a very intelligent person. So I've lucked out in that somehow I have invested in the right areas within the company without investing in an area that could put us under. The biggest has been YouTube, because I said we have 5 employees. 2 of those full-timers are focused on YouTube. And investing in them was a huge risk when it happened, but it paid off almost immediately. And we've grown the YouTube channel into a really good revenue stream for the company. So it all comes down to being too dumb to quit and sticking with it. And then, hopefully we can continue to grow beyond this. I mean, I've said before too, the simplest thing at this point in my career as a filmmaker would be to actually scale way back, because we've put out so many films, and our distributor always says that our movies are evergreen, so they continue generating revenue long after they're out. But the easiest thing for me to do right now at this point in my career would be to sit back, put out 1 or 2 movies a year and just kind of bank off that, have no employees, and just kind of rely on doing it myself. But that seems very boring and counterproductive to where we've been pushing all this time. So I continue to grow, as much as I can, and try to come up with new ways for us to tell stories, which is why we launched the book publishing wing and things like that. So
I love that. Too dumb to quit. And thinking about this, so many people out there right now who feel that they're not qualified to do what they want to do. They don't have the quote unquote education, maybe even the experience. But sometimes just being too dumb to quit is the answer to everything. I can share with you, Seth, when I was 29 years old, when I left my career that I was on for 5 years at a large company and started my firm, that first year, I literally had to drive my Saab 900 up to the dealership, hand over the keys, and say, I can't afford to pay this off. And I think I only owed like $1,500 on it. I mean, it was, I literally rented I've shared this story before on the Bamboo Lab podcast, rented a little shack that was just, it wasn't, to call it a home. It was a home, but it was not a house. It was more of a shack. Lived there, literally had to look into my daughter's piggy bank at time to pay the bills or get food for that first year. And I know if I had been more intelligent at 29, I probably would have quit and gone back and worked in the financial world. And my God, am I so glad that I was too dumb to quit, just like you.
Yeah, it's funny because I remember the day you had asked before we went live, like this was full time. And I said, since 2017. In 2017, we had just had Tommy. So Tommy had just been born. This was July, he was born on April 25th, but in June of that year, our Mothman at Point Pleasant movie came out, and Adrian was just getting ready to go back to work after maternity leave. And the Mothman at Point Pleasant's the most successful thing we've put out. It was in the top 10 best-selling movies on Amazon, period. It actually knocked Logan out of like the 6th spot or something when it took over. So we were at one time we charted above Rogue One. Like the movie cost like $6,000 and it did very well that year. But I very distinctly remember the day Adrian was going to go back to work after maternity leave, and she was clearly distraught over leaving our infant son with me, understandably. And I told her, I was like, quit. I said, go in and put in your resignation. And she did it. Like, she actually took me up on that. And I said, we'll take care of it. We have the business, and we'll rely on that. What that did is it forced me to really seriously look at this as like, okay, well, now all the bills are mine, and we have to make enough money doing this thing to pay those bills. And that's when I really ramped up the amount of work we were doing and the amount of, like how big my ideas were for what we would achieve. But again, it's like that. Yeah, that whole too dumb to quit thing kind of applies there too. Well,
I look at it now. I don't know all the venues where you're being streaming on, but Amazon Prime, Vimeo, Google Play, iTunes, Xbox, YouTube. I mean, you've got a lot of streams out there, a lot of various, venues or paths where your films are being streamed on. So, like I said, sometimes just being too dumb to quit pays off in the end. We put too much pressure and too much emphasis on education. And I know I did with my children. I still do with my youngest, Dawson, who's a sophomore in college. And it's more of probably my hangups than it is is actually a reality. What I want is for people to chase whatever goals and dreams they have, and whatever they need to get there. But like you said, Pete, we found today's topic or title for the podcast, and that is too dumb to quit. So now that you've got 20 some films, you've got these mini series under your belt. Tommy's 5 years old. I mean, things are really building up now. What is a win for you, Seth, in life? What's a triumph for you?
Just time with him. The travel is a huge win. It's a huge part of what I do that keeps me going in it. I'm not motivated as much by the success or failure of our movies as I was when we first started, in terms of financials. At this point, I just want them to be really good and stand out from everything else out there. So for me, it's a win is the places I get to go, the people I get to meet, time with my son, and doing something creative with the team we're building here, behind the scenes, because it's a very interesting collaborative environment, even though we're technically all working remote now, because we're doing something that hasn't been done. So we're just constantly building, working on new projects and building something together. Right now I'm editing a Bigfoot documentary, and Eli Watson is helping me by editing one of the other movies we just shot, and we're working in tandem and going back and forth on talking about what's going on there. And then Alex is hard at work on that second episode of that Alaska thing that's coming out later this month. So there's always something behind the scenes going on. And honestly, even as a company, we're never quiet for very long. Like, it's always obvious what we're working on. But yeah, wins are just time with my son and the collaboration that I get to take part in here at STM, and doing something that I love.
Perfect. Thank you for that. I was just writing those down. Okay, so another question, Seth, and I love this question because I think this is really, there's always some wisdom in this. And if you could go back, you and I were to jump in a time machine today, we're going to fly back to the days when you were just getting that first job in the newspaper, in your newspaper role. You just got hired, day one, and you were to sit down. I'll sit in the back and just kind of listen. What advice would you give to that younger Seth Breedlove about how to take on life, maybe a recipe for success, just something you would share with him, the younger version of you?
That's a good question. Man, I don't know, because that's you picked a very specific time, because I mean, just to set the stage for that time in my life, I had just gone through my first divorce. I had just lost the job that I grew up in, which was working for my parents. It was easy work, and their business went under. And so when the day I went and applied, it was actually out of sheer desperation. I didn't have anything else, and the only thing I'd ever been somewhat good at was writing and storytelling. And so I drove up to the newspaper with a portfolio of like short stories and stuff I'd written. I'd never had anything published. And I took it into the editor, and I gave it to him, and he gave me a freelance contract. And where I went from there was to just work as hard as I could for the next 5-6 years and really learn how to develop a work ethic, because I think I'd been really lazy up to that point in life. So at this point, I have no idea, because at that point, I actually feel like I was doing everything I should do. I might tell myself the thing I just said, which is be too dumb to quit. Mm-hmm. Because there's things that I was doing at that time that I kind of wish I'd stuck with, writing being one of them. But, obviously the film kind of took over eventually. But yeah, it would be that, or that's a good question. Well, I read your sheet, but for some reason, this is one of those things where I can't think of any advice I would offer myself other than don't quit. Quitting was a big deal when I was a kid. One of the I used to write short stories, and one of the stories that I remember very well was called The Quitter, and it was all about this guy based on me, roughly in his 50s, who who has spent his entire life quitting everything. And so he decides he's going to do one thing and refuse to quit it. And it ends up being like a bike marathon. And then over the course of this bike marathon, his bike falls apart and he ends up having to walk the bike across the finish line. But it was all about how he was too dumb to quit. So apparently this is a theme for me, because I kind of forgot about that story until just now. So
we got to get some T-shirts made up that say "Be too dumb to quit."
Yeah,
that's great advice for yourself, in my opinion. I mean, I would love to have been told that. I mean, there were so many things I quit in my life that when I was a younger man, and even not that long ago. I mean, I still find myself, if something's not really clicking along, I try not to anymore. I try to get through it. But there are times that advice would have suited me very well. So I think that's perfect.
Well, it all stems from the fact that there's a logical way to approach your life, according to most people, and that that there's a safe, logical way that you should approach career and love and marriage and all this stuff. And it might not be the right way. Sometimes, like when your job seems like it's going to put your family at risk, it might seem like, okay, well, I should quit doing this and go do something else. But if you're too dumb and you hang in there long enough and you're persistent and you work your butt off, by the way, that's the biggest part of all this that gets overlooked. Because I think we live in a country right now that is wildly entitled.
Mm-hmm.
You've got to work like extremely hard to do this kind of stuff. So yeah.
No, I couldn't agree more. And I think more often there are things that when I going through that motto in life of being too dumb to quit. Yeah, it's going to cost you at times. There are some things you should quit. But if you just follow that model throughout life, you're going to gain so much more than you're going to lose. You're going to lose a few times, but you're going to gain so much more, because we tend to quit when the pressure's on us. We tend to quit when our comfort zone is being stretched. We tend to quit right before that breakthrough comes. And my son said it best one time, a year ago or so. He called me, and we were talking about exercise or something. And he called me. He was a freshman in college, and he said, "Dad, the thing you fear the most is the thing you need to do." And I don't even know what the reference was for it. And that stuck with me when Dawson said that to me. And I've thought about that for the past year and a half, or 16 months, whatever it's been. And that really, I love that. And those are the times when you fear something, when you're probably going to quit, or the likelihood, the probability is increased, when that's the time you need to really, level up, square your shoulders, and plow forward, scale that brick wall, so to speak. So I think it's great advice.
Yeah.
I think we keep it simple as that. And I mean, I'll take that advice from this point forward. Seth, is there any, as we begin to wrap up, is there any final question that I didn't ask that I should have, or is there any final message you want to leave with the Bamboo Pack?
No, not that I can think of. I mean, give our, if you haven't thought about cryptids and Bigfoot, which a lot of people haven't, check out the stuff we make. I think it's approached in a way that it doesn't matter if you're a skeptic or a believer. It's geared at, especially the legend movies. They're all about the telling of stories and the evolution of storytelling, more so than spooky cryptids that may or may not exist. So, I can't think of anything. I'm happy with this too dumb to quit thing, so I'm just going to stick to that.
I think we leave on a high note.
Yeah,
I like that. All right, well, Bamboo Pack member, I'm going to include the link to Small Town Monsters website. You can get on there. From there, you can go to or click on YouTube, Amazon Prime, Xbox, wherever you can find it. You're going to find it. What you're going to like about the Small Town Monsters and the team and the films they put together is they're not trying to cram an idea of a cryptid down your throat. They're just sharing stories and doing exploration. And they're trying to come up with ideas. They're trying to find the truth out there, whatever it may be. So you don't ever feel like you're pressured to believe in something, because a lot of the things that I've seen, I don't believe in that necessarily. But I love the fact that they give me the opportunity to form my own decision. So, Seth, we're going to wrap up. I'd like to talk to you for just a couple of minutes after we go off, but I just want to take the time to thank you for being such a fun guest to have on here. I'm so glad to finally meet you, the man behind the camera, so to speak, and thank you for being such a great guest on the Bamboo Lab podcast.
Yeah, thanks for asking me to be on.
Oh, you're welcome. Well, Bamboo Pack member out there, please, we're going to be back in a week. We'll miss you all. But in the meantime, get out there and sculpt your life. Take some of the wisdom that Seth left with us today, especially that one simple one: be too dumb to quit. Whatever you're facing in life right now, when you're thinking about quitting or you're being challenged to the nth degree, your comfort zone is stretched, you're uncomfortable, you feel tense, uneasy, be too dumb to quit. Move on, plow forward. In the meantime, everyone, get out there and sculpt your life. Do your best. You know, deep inside you, you have a true peak identity, man. You've been carrying a fake ID around your entire life. Discard the fake ID. Sculpt all the bull crap around you that society and family and friends have told you who you are. Sculpt away all the excess, useless marble until you find that true peak identity, that angel in the marble. Before we wrap up, one shout out to Cairo, Egypt. We have a lot of followers from some reason out there. Every week we get pounded by subscribers and listeners from Cairo. Please send us a heart message. I'd love to hear about you, your story, what you're getting from the podcast. But we're 6,000 miles away, and we'd love to hear from you here in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan on the Bamboo Lab podcast. I appreciate you all.